Hello, it is time for you to put on your thinking caps because in this video we're going to start talking about one of the critical aspects of working with Photoshop, and that is the use of masks, which is why I've got the awesome graphics sitting over here for your amusement. Now, if you are completely new to Photoshop, you probably have no real idea of what masks are. And masks are one of those things where if you don't know how they work, you really do not yet understand the full power of Photoshop. You have to understand how masks work. So let's start off with the basics. What is a mask? Well, when somebody tells you, when you start talking about masks in Photoshop, there's really only one thing I really want you to keep in mind, and that is visibility. Because when you really boil it down, the primary role of a mask is to control the visibility of a layer on a pixel-by-pixel basis. Now, some other things come along with that. You can shape certain special effects because of that, but in the end, it really boils down to the same job. It's just about controlling the visibility of a layer on a pixel-by-pixel basis. There's something else you have to know that kind of goes along with this. I'm going to get it written down early so that you will see it later on and you'll be like, oh, okay, I remember when he said that. And it'll seem really random right now, but that's the colors black and white. Because in terms of layer masks, you're really only working in black and white, and black is going to be equal to transparent, and white is going to be equal to opaque. Remember that I said that. All right, now, moving along, a couple other points I want to make before we really start showing masks themselves, in that there are two primary types that we're going to worry about. Now, I say primary types because technically there is a third type that we're not going to talk about very much. I will mention it at some point along these videos, and we'll get to that in just a minute. The two types that we're going to focus on are layer masks and vector masks. Now, what's the difference between the two? A layer mask is comprised of pixels. A vector mask is comprised of vector shapes, meaning paths. I don't know why I wanted to put a P there. It's probably because I can't write. Now, we're going to spend most of our time talking specifically about layer masks, but we will take a look at vector masks as well. The important thing to keep in mind here is that a single layer can have both of these. A single layer can have a layer mask and it can have a vector mask, and that the result of the two is combined. So if you have a layer, let's say here's just a representation of a layer, and it has a mask which only makes the center circle inside of it visible. And then it has a vector mask on top of that, making only the square inside that circle visible. Then when all is said and done, that's all you're going to see is just that square. And we'll see a little bit of that as we go along. Now, all of that out of the way, let's take a look at layer masks in a way where we can start to kind of work with them and play with them. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and let's bring in our jellyfish picture. Now, I'm just digging through the sample pictures that are included along with Windows 7. If you don't have these or you don't want to use these, you can really use any picture in the world. It doesn't matter what picture you have, just for the record. So I'll bring in my jellyfish, and then I'm going to put an image on top of this as a separate layer. The easiest way to do that is to go to File, Place, and I'll grab the koala picture, and we'll put the koala on top. Now, once I press Enter, by default, if you haven't changed anything, your newly placed document will come in as a smart object. That's totally fine. We could leave it as a smart object, but I don't want there to be any confusion. So I'm going to right-click on the layer and choose Rasterize Layer so it's no longer a smart object. It's just a stack of pixels. The good news is if you're using a like CS5 or one of these later versions, I believe CS4 did it as well, you can attach a layer mask to a smart object and it'll follow along with it as you move it around. In earlier versions of the Creative Suite, a layer mask could not be linked to an actual layer. So it couldn't be, I'm sorry, it couldn't be linked to a smart object. So you try to move the smart object and the layer mask would stay where it was. And we'll see where that can be a problem a little bit later as we move along. Okay, so first off, how do we create these masks? It's pretty easy. The easiest way I know is to click on the new mask button, which is located right down here at the bottom of the layer panel. It looks like a little tiny gray square with a white circle inside of it. However, you can also go under Layer, jump down to Layer Mask, and choose From Transparency. What that's going to do is take the transparency of your image and use it to create a brand new mask. If you have any special forms of transparency on your layer, those will be taken into account. But for now, we're going to keep things very simple. If I just undo, again, most of the time, I think 9 times out of 10, when I need a new layer mask, I just come down and click on this button right here at the bottom of the layer panel, and boom, there you have it. Now I'm going to jump back to my previous document, and I'm going to draw your attention back over to something that I wrote really early on, and that is that black equals transparent and white equals opaque. So if we take a look over here at our document, here I have the koala sitting on top of the jellyfish background. And notice that the layer mask for the koala is completely white, meaning completely opaque. And lo and behold, all we see is the koala. Now let's change that. Notice that inside the layer panel, I can click on the koala and you'll notice the layer itself gets highlighted, or I can click on the mask and the mask gets highlighted. Take a look at something else as well. It's really subtle and really easy to miss. But when I have the layer itself selected, so when I click on the thumbnail that shows the koala, take a look at my color panel at the very top. It's currently allowing me to choose any color using RGB. However, when I click on the mask, look what we get. We only get black. That is because on a layer mask, you can only paint black and white. You cannot paint shades of color. Because really, all this is doing is controlling visibility by using black, white, and shades of gray. So to get things kind of started, let me get my paintbrush out, which I already have. And we want to paint using black, but I'm going to make my brush nice and big. So again, notice in my foreground color that I'm painting with the color black, and watch what happens as I start to paint around the koala's face. I am starting to expose through to our previous layer. So we can see that blue water around the jellyfish, like so. And I can scribble all in through here. And in just a few short moments, we have a floating koala's head sitting inside a tank along with our jellyfish. Now, what did I just do? It looks like I was erasing, but I actually wasn't erasing at all. As a matter of fact, if I move my mouse over here to the layer panel and I right-click on this layer, if I right-click on the layer mask specifically, let me make sure I'm precise in this, I can choose to disable the layer mask, delete it. I can add the mask to selection, so I can do selections with this layer mask. Very, very helpful. I can refine the mask, which is something we'll talk about in a separate video, and then I have some mask options, so I can actually change its visibility color. We're not going to deal with that at the moment. Now, if you take a look at the thumbnail for the mask, take a look at what we have. The area where the koala's head exists is perfectly white. And remember what I told you about the color white. That's perfectly opaque. Everything else is black, which is completely transparent. So in effect, it's like we erased all the way around the koala's head, but it's in a non-destructive manner. At any point, I can right-click on that mask, choose Disable Layer Mask, and everything is right back to where it was. I can right-click on it again and re-enable that mask, and you see how that works. Now, if I get the Move tool out, I can move this guy around. Now, I did that by tapping the V key, Move V tool. Move is the V key, thank you very much. And we can move that around, but notice something. Notice that wherever I move the koala image around, the mask comes along as well. That's because by default, there is a link in between the mask and the layer. And you can see that from the tooltip. Indicates layer mask is linked to layer. If you unlink the two, in fact, let me undo to put the koala's head back where it was. If I switch this off by clicking on it with the left mouse button, I can then move the mask entirely separately of the image, which looks a little trippy because as I move it around, neither of the images are moving, just that visibility is moving around. Or I can select just the koala and I can move him and the mask stays put. So again, just remember that a mask is here just to allow you to control visibility. Now at some point it may be helpful for you to see just the mask itself, and you can do that at any time by holding down the Alt or Command key if you're on a Mac and clicking on the mask itself. And this shows you just the data for the mask and nothing else. The neat thing about doing this is you can actually paint like this. So if I come over to my foreground color, I can set this over to like a 50% gray and paint on, I think that's roughly where the eyes were, but I mean, that makes sense. If I Alt click again, this takes us back to the image itself, and you can see we're starting to be able to see through the koala's head right there in that area. So I can paint this in a little more solidly. There you go. And you can see that we have 50% transparency in between the two. That's because, once again, a mask's job is to control visibility. And out here in the black, we have no visibility. We have 100% transparency. In the white, we have 100% opacity. And then here at 50% gray, we have 50% transparency. We can see only partially through. Now, this is a really simple example of masks, and masks can actually get quite intense. You can do all kinds of things with masks, and in the end, you're going to have to kind of get a little creative. Let me take my mask and clear it out. So I'm going to hit Control-A, delete, and because my background color is currently set to white, that fills the mask in with white, which is completely opaque. As an example, if I switch this over to black and white, like so, and I hit delete again, now it looks like the koala disappeared, but you have to think about what's going on with the mask. The mask was just filled with black, and black is 100% transparency. So again, it's stuff that you have to kind of keep in mind. Let's go ahead, however, and we'll fill this back in with white. Now I did that by holding down Alt and hitting the delete key. And I want to show you something a little bit outside the norm, kind of beyond the scope, but just sort of for the fun of it. If I select my koala image, not the mask, notice you can click on each one individually, and it's important to know that. Here's why it's important. Right now, I'm painting on the koala's actual layer. However, if I jump over here, I'm painting on the koala's mask. Now I'm painting white on it in this case, so no changes are taking place. But it is important to know that you can paint on each one individually. Also, notice you'll get two entirely different color swatches. For instance, I can set this guy to red, and when I'm actually painting on the layer itself, I can paint red all day long. However, when I switch over to the mask, it remembers the last color I was painting on masks, and it allows me to just paint on that color. If I try to paint on red, it grabs the nearest shade of gray to the color that I chose. So just something to be aware of. I'm going to undo that by hitting Control-Alt-Z a couple of times. Now, again, let's do something fancy. I'm going to select my actual koala layer, and I'm going to go under Select and choose Color Range. Now, out here inside the document, if I move this window out of the way, I get my little eyedropper, and I'm going to click somewhere here on his nose, and then play with the fuzziness slider until I get some interesting looking selection floating out here. Actually, you know what? Pardon me, sorry for changing things midway through, but this will be a lot cooler, so please bear with me. I don't know if you're actually using the koala and the jellyfish. If you're using Windows 7, there's no reason not to. If you're not, bear with me anyway, because this will still be cool. I'm going to delete out this layer mask. I'm going to right-click on it and choose Delete Layer Mask. Now, I'm going to take my background layer and double-click on it, and it'll try to change the name to Layer 0. That's fine. Then I'm going to reverse the two. That'll put the jellyfish right on top of the koala. Now, let's do something even cooler. Let's go back over to Select, Color Range, and I'm going to click on this shade of blue out here. I'm going to hold down Shift and click on this shade of blue here in the lower left-hand corner, and take a look at what we're getting here inside the preview for the color range. As I increase the fuzziness slider, we're selecting all of those shades of blue, but the jellyfish itself is being pretty much left alone because he's primarily white and orange and red and all these other shades. So we'll click OK, and this gives us a selection of just the water, really. I mean, barring a few extra areas. Now let's go over to Layer, Layer Mask, and choose either from Transparency, or we can just click on our button down here like I did before, and now check out what happened. Can you tell what happened if you just look at it? The jellyfish has now disappeared. He's actually being removed by the layer mask. You can see that the jellyfish is black, and that's revealing the koala underneath. If I hold down Alt and I click on the mask itself, you can see a nice little black image of that jellyfish. Now let's do something really fancy. Like that wasn't fancy enough. While we're looking at the mask, let's hit Control I for invert. Now, can you guess what's going to happen when I switch back out of here? I'm going to hit Alt and click on the mask one more time. And now we have our jellyfish floating right in front of our koala. And again, this is in a non-destructive fashion. The entire image of the jellyfish, the water and everything, is still there. Nothing has changed. So it's important to be aware of that. Now, I did mention vector masks earlier. You can create a vector mask on a layer as long as there is already a layer mask on it. You can just click on your new mask button again, and this will add what looks like a second mask, but that second mask is always going to be a vector mask. Now, a vector mask is controlling visibility based on some sort of a vector shape, and to really show that off, we need to create a vector shape. The easiest way to do that is to come down to our shape tools. Now this is located, if you look down here toward about kind of 2/3 of the way down your tools panel, you'll see the pen tool, the text tool, the path select tool, and then finally your shape tool. Choose any one of these shapes you like. I would avoid the custom shape tool for the time being. Let's just grab something like an ellipse. And I'll drag this out and let go and take a look at what happened. You have to look a little bit closely, but we have this ellipse which was drawn in the middle of our document. You can actually see the ellipse reflected here in the thumbnail, and only inside the area of the ellipse do we actually get any visibility at all. Remember I said earlier that the result of these masks are combined. So we have the visibility of the vector mask, declaring that we can only see what's going on inside of this ellipse. Then we have the result of the pixel version, the layer mask, saying that we can only see those pixels that take place on the jellyfish itself. So the end result is that we can only see pieces of the jellyfish that are inside of this ellipse. Now, the difference between, the key difference, as I mentioned earlier, between the layer mask and the vector mask is that the vector mask is made up of vector shapes. Vector shapes are important because they supersede the world of pixels. You can take a vector shape and make it big and make it small, and it will always retain its shape. It won't get all chunky and nasty the way pixels really will. So if I was to grab my path select tool and select this path, I can move it around, and it's almost like moving a spotlight. I can control just those areas that are visible. So this would be a nice way if I really wanted to control how much of those tendrils are visible on our jellyfish. I could handle it this way. Now you still see that path showing up in the document. As soon as I get off this layer, that will disappear, just showing us the end result. And if I click and move, all of these, I have to use the move tool for this, by the way, so if I hit the V key and grab the move tool, if I move these around, notice all of the masks, both of the masks actually, and the image are all linked together. So currently they're all moving as one. If I unlink the vector mask, then it gets left behind. If I unlink the image, then the image moves entirely separate of the layer mask, which moves entirely separate of the vector mask, which can be a little hard to manage, but something you need to be aware that you can do. So I think this was a really good overview of how masks work. Again, they're here just to control visibility. Several things kind of come along with that. It's a great way to hide parts of a layer without destroying that layer in any way. So if you find yourself, like you've got to, in this case, remove a jellyfish from the water and have it, float somewhere inside your scene, then consider using a mask instead of erasing, because this way we can go back to our original image at any time just by right-clicking and disabling these masks. So I think that covers all of that. Now, some final things I do want to mention. You can delete out masks just by right-clicking and choosing that from the menu. Also, something else you can do, which is pretty cool, if I re-enable this, you'll notice we also have the ability to apply a layer mask. And applying a layer mask simply gets rid of the mask by making everything that was transparent completely gone. Basically, it's kind of like an eraser. It really is like you just erased out the rest of the image. So very, very handy if you need to do that. That, however, will conclude this discussion. Again, I just wanted to kind of go over the key principles behind masks themselves. That will wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.